Hello Internet, I'm Zahn and welcome back to the Quick Look series. It has been a pretty decent amount of time since I've recorded this particular type of content. I know on the channel for the greater portion of the last year, we've been primarily focusing on Hollow Knight. And I do intend to come back to Hollow Knight because I enjoyed my time with it, and I plan on finishing that game and doing its DLC. But because the overall Let's Play is going to be on the longer side, I thought I would take some time to mix up the content with some quick look videos that are going to be a bit more condensed and shorter, and will be sort of a way to switch things up, and then we'll return to Hollow Knight and finish that one off a little bit later. So as you can see from the title screen here, what I'm going to be playing through in this series of quick look videos is R-Type Final from the PS2. Now R-Type Final, I'm going to jump into the menu so I don't have the demo repeating. But for a little bit of background, R-Type Final came out in the early 2000s on PS2. And it is a scrolling shooter, or a shoot 'em up, or shmup. And this is one of my all-time favorite shmups on any system. And I was introduced to this game once again, as it always comes down to my good friend Flammy, who was showing me a lot of PS2 games back in the day. He had recommended this one when it was relatively new. It might have been out for a couple years when I eventually tried it. But not having played any scrolling shooters at the time, or any recent ones, he recommended I pick this one up and try it. And it's a pretty good game. It's decently challenging. You guys are going to watch me die a lot here. But it does some things that are kind of interesting and distinct from some of the other more classic model scrolling shooters. And so I thought it'd be fun to play through some R-Type Final. We'll see how far we get. This isn't going to be a complete Let's Play because there's actually a decent amount of content to go through in this game that would require a pretty large investment of time. But what we'll go ahead and do is get started, and I'll jump into some of the mechanics and how things work in R-Type Final. Create a new file. This is where we'll be working on our progress from. At the beginning, there's not a whole lot unlocked when you start the game up. We can look at this AI mode thing a little bit later. But I'm going to go ahead and jump into the game proper, and then probably after the first series of continues, I will go into some of the additional unlockable content and some of the other stuff that you can do in this game, in addition to just playing through the different campaign modes. And when we load in, right away, we're given the hangar interface here. And then the kind of neat thing about R-Type Final compared to a lot of other shmups is that you can choose different ships. And these ships are customizable to some extent, and you can sort of tweak loadouts, and I'll show that in a second. But we're given 8 slots for our sort of default fleet of ships in the hangar that we can take on different missions throughout the story. I'll go into the Arm Museum a little bit later, since it'll help once we've unlocked a bit more to show off what that is. But each ship has a different model, and the little glowy thing on the front is what's called the Force Unit. And for the sake of simplicity, we'll start with the Arrowhead, which is one of the base ships you get in the game. We can customize its color. Both the body and the canopy can be customized based on these preset colors. There's no color wheel option in this particular game. Missile Select is a secondary weapon that you get from collecting power-ups, and it auto-fires. We can do a Depth Bomb, which is a downward falling explosive projectile. I tend to go at homing missiles since they're pretty useful. They track towards enemies. You could fire, I think, 2 at a time. Bits are kind of like options in Gradius. They're these things that orbit your ship. You have to unlock them through getting power-ups as well. But they do different things like protect from incoming damage. The shadow bit tends to be useful because it produces trails that cause damage and will take out weaker enemies that are trying to swarm you. So we'll go with shadow bit. I think later we might get a chance to customize the wave cannon. But for now, we've got missiles and bits. We'll go ahead and get started. The difficulty, easiest is baby, the hardest is R-type, but we're going to go right in the middle and go human. This game is pretty challenging on its own. You play through it on the highest difficulty, it's pretty brutal. The enemies are faster, the enemy projectiles are faster. And here we have sort of a prologue. Basking in the summer sun, I greeted the seabirds, but then I entered the demon's den. The story for this game is not super fleshed out. It's kind of narrative driven. It's really more of little sort of bits of dialogue that are sprinkled in. There's no cutscenes or character interactions, at least not that I remember. But right away, we've picked up our first power-up, which was that yellow, blue. The first power-up gives us our actual force orb. And one of the main gimmicks to R-type that's been a mainstay of the series going all the way back to the old school era, okay, that's blue, is this round ball in the front called the force unit. And what you can do is, when you have it attached to the front or back of your ship, you can use it to eat incoming enemy projectiles to some extent. It won't stop certain enemies from hitting you, but things like bullets can be absorbed using the projectile, and it powers up the more of those colored crystal things you get. But you saw me do it a little bit earlier. One of the neat things about R-type is you can use the X button to launch the force bit out, and it'll separate from the ship. And each one that you unlock throughout the game functions a little bit differently. And the color crystal beam layouts also change depending on the ship model you're using. So there's quite a few different permutations of how you can have your ship equipped. But if I launch the bit out, it's going to go to a set distance, and then by hitting the fire button, it'll continue to launch projectiles while it's out there, and it'll do continuous damage to the boss. And while the force is out, it'll start to fill up a meter you see in the lower left called dose. And that's essentially your bomb, your super bomb crush attack. I'm not going to be able to get that. That's a bit. The real name of the game in R-type is learning how to manipulate the force object while dodging through enemy patterns. There we go. Learning enemy patterns, obviously, and then capitalizing on openings to make it through the different sections. And this first sort of mini-boss is this walking crab creature, which walks along these different slopes and launches the projectiles from its back. Overall, it's not too difficult, but it can box you in really easily if you're not paying attention. And it changes angles and sort of moves around the screen as it goes here, which is meant to give you some practice in learning how to... I don't want to run into the boss. Learning how to reposition the force on the front and back of your ship, since the ship itself can't shoot behind it, but if you attach the force orb to the rear of the ship, then the laser projectile will shoot backwards. And you'll need to do that in some instances as the area layout and the levels changes. There's this little mini boss here, which is giving me more trouble than I would have expected. is meant to sort of teach the player how to work around enemy patterns. And this beam that you see me charging up is what's called the wave cannon, I believe. And that can be charged up to varying levels depending on the ship that you're using. They can go up to 3 or so levels. Oh boy. And it unleashes a really powerful projectile from the front of the ship, which is going to be useful when the boss is positioned like this, but not when it's on the other side and I can't actually hit it. Alright, let's switch up the ships a little bit. You have, was it 2 lives, and then you use a continue, and you have a set amount of continues. I'm going to try we'll go down the line, we'll do shooting star. This particular ship has a different type of wave cannon, and a different type of force too. The laser projectiles for this one go at an angle instead of kind of bouncing around. But if we were to charge up the wave cannon, this one has a persistent beam that comes out for a set amount of time and does focus damage. Pretty useful if you have a stationary target. Might work to our advantage here to sort of shred the incoming projectiles. We could use our bit to shield us as well. I should have been doing that from before. The red crystal power-up for this particular ship is this forward-reaching, kind of oscillating laser pattern. Kind of a more focused hitbox. It's not going to hit around it in a big range, but it'll do kind of focused damage. I think we have a set amount of time to kill some of these bosses. It'll be in our best interest to not waste time. Oh, this one has a different type of missile too. This one has the sort of depth charge, downward arcing projectile. And now we're moving on. It's a little bit difficult to try and talk and play at the same time in shoot 'em ups, but I do want to make sure I'm explaining the gameplay mechanics to you guys accurately when I'm doing this. But now we're moving closer towards the later part of the level. These kind of garbage collector ships will spit projectiles at you. But now we got the first boss. And the first boss is this sort of living metal creature. It creates hazards around it using those sort of tendril looking things, and then it attacks with this big focus beam that you saw shooting through the level as we were proceeding here. And then it'll try and box you in with the sharp extensions on its limbs. And also try and pelt you with copy versions of the metal ships. So the name of the game here is just staying out of range of the dangerous attacks the boss has and waiting for the opportunity to lay hits on its core when it reveals itself. There we go. right, for clearing stage, what is it, 1.0, we unlocked another ship, number 37, the R9E Midnight Eye. As you proceed through R-Type Final and defeat bosses and clear stages, you will unlock more ships to use in the different levels. And some of them are locked behind specific conditions. I don't know if we'll see it in this series of quick look videos, but there are also branching paths in some of the stages, and you get different ships for completing those, and there's a lot. You probably saw it on the initial screen. The base roster before I think some of the bonus ships is 99 models, and there's a ton to unlock, and they all do different things. And as you proceed through the different unlock trees, you get new core weapon types, you get new force types, wave cannons, and a whole bunch of stuff changes with the different models.